In This Corner of the World is a film that's based on the consequences of the Pacific War. Such a complex event where various parts of the world suffered is difficult to fully represent in a fictional narrative. There's no doubt that authenticity was a priority, as the director Sunao Katabuchi and his team went to great lengths to recreate the setting as faithfully to the time as they could. But naturally, not everything can be objectively replicated. So from this point, what is music of all things able to accomplish? After all, a film about war doesn't necessarily need music that's overwhelming or loud, because sometimes the strength is in the clarity of smaller details.
うちはようぼーっとした子じゃ言われとって。
These details are introduced in the very first cue, an orchestral arrangement of the Christmas carol O Come All Ye Faithful. The melodic line begins in the low strings, before getting passed straight to the woodwinds. As Suzu's boat approaches the town, the familiarity of the melody allows the music instead to draw attention to how the orchestral families mesh. It's particularly striking how easy it is to keep track of each instrumental line, even as more gradually layer on top of one another. Then as Suzu begins to take in her surroundings, the carol fades away, and the second important aspect of this film's music is established: her perspective itself. Despite the brightness and levity, the song's English name roughly translates as unbearable sadness. However, as we heard at the start, the singer enters solo as the instruments begin to weave in and around it, suggesting that despite the sorrow depicted in the lyrics, the purity of sound expressed in the singer's voice is able to cause the music to rise up and meet it. Even after the lowest point, life continues on if we can accept it. The composer for In This Corner of the World is Rieko Miyoshi, better known by her stage name Kotringo. She was a graduate of the Berklee College of Music in Boston, and would end up scoring the film after working with Katabuchi on his previous project, My Miracle. She wrote the music for the end credits, called Kodomo no Sekai, or The Children's World in English, and a lot of the traits of this song seem to have carried over into In This Corner of the World. The main body of the track uses just a cello, her own voice, and a constantly moving piano that keeps everything afloat. I know I talked a lot about the piano in my video on A Silent Voices music, but it really is an important instrument. Since it can coordinate its own rhythmically independent lines, it's one of the best possible vehicles for Suzu's free-flowing imagination. If A Silent Voices music explored what it means for voices to interact, this film's score explores the results of musical interactions that could come about. Because despite having a relatively frugal ensemble, Kotringo definitely got her money's worth due to her understanding of the capabilities and limitations of each individual part, and how they complement one another. It's no coincidence that the cover of the album has the characters playing ordinary household objects like orchestral instruments, making the most out of their imagination with so little at their disposal. Ensembles of this size aren't particularly novel. In fact, Made in Abyss uses an even smaller group, deliberately recorded in a large vicinity to give the impression of two individuals exploring a massive cave. But when it comes to this film, that small size means that there are less lines that the listener needs to take in, thus making it easier to hear and maintain the relationships those lines have between each other. Maybe that's how Kotringo was able to get so much substance out of a meek and humble sound. In fact, my favorite musical moment from this film is actually a pretty insignificant one.
船ですか?
For us today, we know that Battleship Yamato was part of a much larger conflict that involved the innumerable loss of life. However, to Suzu, a young Japanese housewife in the 1940s, in that exact moment, it was a discovery. The sheer scope of a ship housing 2,700 men was something she'd never imagined before, and the piano increases its activity as she examines it in more detail. This is a film about the war, but its progress is something we only see manifest through the daily lives of these characters. Even before the air raids and shelter preparation, evidence of it was revealing itself in small ways, such as the rationing of certain ingredients for families. And it's situations like this where Suzu's creativity shines, whether it's sketching, making clothes, or indeed improvising recipes. Other than the ending songs, this is actually the longest track in the entire film, and definitely the most elaborate, creating a spontaneous texture of clapping sounds, bassoon, piano, marimba, female vocals, strings, percussion, and even whistling. Granted, this kind of collegiality exists in almost every music cue, not just when she's doing stuff like this, and the piano maintains the sense of ensemble as if it were her through line, often concluding a track by itself after all the other instruments have dropped out.
いってらっしゃい。
Through Suzu's eyes, the film seems to support the idea that self-expression is essential to making sense of the world. That is, until she's no longer able to. Suzu loses her right hand in an accident during the third act, and with it goes the outlet she's had for most of her life. The moment of the explosion itself is the only instance throughout the film where both the visuals and the music unravel their conventions. Other than a thick layer of distorted static, the tempo is in a constant, uneasy flux, with some notes even being digitally reversed. In this state, the piano has been stripped of all its guiding power as Suzu's mind goes into shock. You can hear it trying to regain its sense of musical layers as she narrates what she regrets not being able to do.
反対じゃったらよかったのに。せめてギター脱いで走っておれば。
What this culminates in is a moment that never came to be. The clarity of the piano, Suzu's right hand, and Harumi, who she held in that hand, are all gone by the end of this sequence. This disorientation lingers in the score for a while after. The different instruments are now polarized from one another, unable to interweave as they used to. Even if Suzu survived, how can she understand what's left for her without being able to interact with the world as she once used to?
左手で描いた絵みたいに。
The piano, which once created momentum for other instruments in this small ensemble, is now totally isolated, even lacking the spirit to coordinate its own independent rhythms. All that remains is both left and right hand plodding along, locked in unison, creating nothing but colorless dissonance after colorless dissonance, only settling into B minor by the end, implying that the reality has finally settled for her. Of course, things do make a recovery by the end, but as you can hear, the approach to ensemble isn't as focused on making individual lines pop out as they once did. These blends are far more gentle and organic, almost like an acknowledgement of her change in lifestyle. No matter what form daily life takes, people persist with their own perspectives. Although Suzu can't draw properly anymore, and longs for her life back in Hiroshima, she still manages to think of strategies to get by with a scarcity of resources.
何でも使うて暮らし続けるのがうちらの戦いですけ。
The majority of In This Corner of the World is largely episodic, and the transitions in between aren't terribly smooth or interesting themselves, which overall makes the film feel a lot longer than it actually is. Yet, at the end of the day, it was all in service of understanding what exactly could be lost in an instant.
みんなが笑うて暮らせりゃええのにね。
In fact, all of Sunao Katabuchi's films have a similar slow pace, and all of them explore a certain kind of lifestyle. Even Black Lagoon, a TV show he directed, focuses on the criminal lifestyle and what it takes to accept those kinds of circumstances. Why is it so important that this musical narrative is such a fluid and artful recollection by Suzu? Because it's that exact attitude that carried her through. The idea of music rooting you in a character's point of view is relatively ordinary in my opinion. However, by training our attention on the individuality of instruments, the clarity of this simple music paints a much more vivid perspective. And perspective is something that every viewer from every corner of the world can relate to. Even across decades and cultural differences, music has that ability. We don't necessarily use it to soften the blow of reality, just to add a little color where it's needed. Thanks again for watching, guys. Just to disclaim, this is all my own interpretation of the music. Almost nothing here has necessarily been confirmed or denied by the composer or anyone who worked on this film, because honestly I couldn't find much info on this score specifically, so I had to make do with my own intuition. Like, there are some elements of developing musical themes in this film, but ultimately they felt so downplayed to me that I didn't really know how to integrate them into the discussion while staying on topic. But if you do have any questions about this video, feel free to hit me up on Twitter.